Hey, Vinnie, thank you so much for having me today. I'm really excited to be sharing a little bit about what we do and what we see in the marketplace. So thank you for the time.
Martin, good to have you. Are you a mountaineer? That's a great visual there.
Thank you. Funny enough, I am a little bit of a climber. However, this is really kind of representing just kind of the hopeful nature of what we can bring to the table, kind of hitting the summit of this big behemoth called SAP. How do we actually rise above it and actually make it work for us?
Okay, I like the metaphor.
Yeah, so let me take some time, and I'm gonna run through a few slides. We're gonna keep it short just to kind of get the conversation going. But I wanted to share with you, in particular, some of the things that we see out in the market and where do we fit into it specifically, because we don't fit into the more traditional sense of what people would call a consulting company. We actually don't even call ourselves that. We like to refer to ourselves as practitioners, because we like to climb the mountain with you, not just show you where the mountaintop is, as an example. We're big believers in the fact that we can transform the way SAP actually works for us. So we're less about trying to worry about how to put it in and what to configure, even though that's all important. But at the end of the day, we're thinking about how do we transform supply chain driven organizations, manufacturers of sorts, right? Those that make and buy and sell and distribute products, those that SAP was typically built for. And how do we make it run better? How do we actually make it work for you as opposed to it? So we're not about trying to sell software or trying to identify different things around them. One of the things we believe is that supply chains have both a commercial and a benevolent good. It's something that provides us with the ability to not only help companies get from one end to the other and get their customer goods to them, but also to bring special needs to those that don't have. This is actually a picture of one of our teammates in the Philippines helping some of the folks out there, working with them hand in hand with some of the supply chain goods and foods that we would bring to them. So it really is important to us, and it's kind of harnesses and kind of solidifies who we are as an organization. We're headquartered in Chicago, actually in the western suburbs, Naperville, Illinois. However, we have a global reach. We've done projects with companies that are literally worldwide, everything from the BPs of the world, $160 billion to local Chicago-based companies. They have two things in common, which is our niche, is they run SAP, and that they actually run some kind of a supply chain. So they make, buy, sell, distribute something across the industries, whether it's mining, whether it's petroleum, whether it's petrochemical, whether it's consumer goods, etc. So that's kind of who we are as an organization. I think this is the slide that really helps people solidify kind of what do we stand for? Because on the one end of the spectrum, you typically find the more strategic consultants, right? Those that typically come to an executive team and say, hey, here's the market strategy you need to follow. Here's your segmentation. Here's where you need to go. And they build a very high level strategic roadmap. Then on the other side of the spectrum, you typically have more of your SIs, your system integrators, those that implement, what are the things you want? Tell me what you want and I'll go and do it for you. It's kind of that issue of very technical oriented. What we have found a niche in the market is specifically kind of in the middle, is how do we take the strategic intent and bring practical knowledge to it so that we can actually execute against it. So when we talk about, people talk often about IBP and sales and operations planning. I mean, you and I are old enough to know that that's been around for the last 20, 30 years. It's nothing new. But then people don't know how to execute again. So we talk about sales and operations planning, but then what's the sales and operations execution? And how do you use technologies like SAP? This has got nothing to do whether we're talking an old ERP monolith versus a modern post ERP, or whether we're even talking about the future state. We're just talking about the notion of using the technology in a smart way to achieve business value. And in this case for us, that's SAP, whether it's ECC, S4, or where we want to go. So that's kind of us. So we're very typically the guys that we hire, Vinnie, you'd appreciate this, is not necessarily just the technical guys. These are guys that have run plants, run distribution centers, are supply chain directors or practitioners, but they just have 10, 15 years of SAP experience. So when we engage with organizations, we have the ability to sit down with a COO and really say, hey, this is how you will do this in SAP to achieve the following goals. And it really becomes practical, very, very, very tangible. And what's pretty cool is we often say that we hear these things, and people actually comment about this picture and actually often say, were you the one sitting in that meeting room listening to our issues? Because this is so typical, right? My inventories are too high, or I'm stocking out, or I just can't find the information I'm looking for, or the people are overworked and overstressed, especially recently with COVID and all. We have unhappy customers. We just can't keep up with things. Or, often and more is the notion that SAP just doesn't work for us. It's the wrong tool. We need to find a better option. There's something else. And at the heart of it, what we've noticed that it's really got very little to do with the technology itself. And I'll talk a bit about that. The technology can be used, but it's really got a lot more to do with the people and process side of things and how we address that. So a couple examples of what people have gained from utilizing some of our services is, and these are real tangible. So over 160 odd projects over the last 20 odd years, we see these kind of results, everything from inventory reductions, turns improvements, service level improvements, process efficiencies, production throughput increases, so much so that we can actually guarantee these results for clients. So one of the things we typically do is we'll go in and assess an environment and say, hey, based on that, here is what we expect you to be able to get when you mature your organization through this continuum more effectively. And I'll speak about that in more detail. The only way we can do this is we use a very, very trusted and kind of proven methodology called ongoing value optimization. It's steeped in continuous improvement. It's embedded in the whole theory of constraints and the idea of taking a very agile approach to solving problems. So we assess the situation, and I use all of those big words that I said, and we do that in 1 week. No tools, we go straight into the system as if we were the practitioners, and we look across the end-to-end supply chain and can literally develop a roadmap for organizations to say, here's how and what you need to do to achieve those goals that I set out earlier. Then when people say, yeah, that sounds like a good idea, we move into a transformational state. And that's not moving it from ECC to S4 or moving it to the cloud or any of that. We're literally talking about transforming the way you do business, rethinking the way you manage your data, rethinking the way you actually report out on your data. What kind of metrics are we looking at? How do we educate the people to really start benefiting from understanding what SAP can and cannot do? And it really is a true transformation in the people and the culture and the mindset. So much so that some of these projects actually have a cultural measure linked to it. Talk about employee engagement measures that come out the other side and show improvements. And then I guess the last step of this is, which is key to any kind of continuous improvement, is to ensure that whatever successes we got, that we were able to sustain them. Not us, but the organization. So we must make sure we put in all the governance structures and all the measures and all the organizational structures to ensure that they can continue throughout the process without us, and making sure that it actually sticks. I've got some really cool stories I can share with you in a bit about how the sustainability really works. Actually, one organization here, just in Chicago, engaged in a similar program with us. They had an inventory goal. They wanted to reduce it. They had 9 months to do so. The CFO kind of put up his hands like, I don't know what to do. I don't know how to do this. They got us involved, and we did the assess, we transformed, and within 9 months, we were able to achieve their goal and went beyond it to obviously the excitement of the CFO, but also the parent company. The most important part about this, not only were they able to sustain it for a couple of years, when COVID hit, they actually experienced a demand change in their product lineup, like many companies, right? They were making cleaning equipment that nobody was buying anymore, but they had cleaning chemicals that everybody started buying. And they had a massive demand shift within the organization. And they were able to, within 2 to 3 weeks, literally convert the entire business around focusing on the chemicals because they used the technology effectively. They just adjusted the demand, they adjusted the bills of material, they've adjusted up and down the rules and the levers that needed to, and they were almost, like I said, within weeks where they were driving towards it, to the extent where they went from almost going, we don't know how we're going to handle this pandemic, to those were the best 3 years of our existence to date. Just because they were able to capitalize on using the technology as it was designed. They didn't buy any bolt-ons. All they did is they used that knowledge that they gained on how to really use the technology effectively. So typically companies say, well, how do we know whether we need you guys? So we use this as a measure for organizations, a 5-level maturity continuum. We'd call it the business maturity continuum. And all that really means is to what extent are we using the technology to meet our business goals? That's the level of this maturity. And in simple terms, I'm not going to read all the bullets, but in simple terms, it's as simple as saying, does the technology work for me? Yes or no? Do I have a single source of truth? Do I have a whole bunch of bolt-ons or not? That's kind of at level 1. And I have a stable single source of truth kind of thing. Then the second level is, do we trust the data? Do I trust the information that's coming out of it, or do I have to export it into spreadsheets, run a whole bunch of filters, exclude certain things? And if I have to do that, then I'm stuck in level 2. If I trust my data, my transactional data, then the question is how well do the business rules in the system reflect the reality, the business rules in reality? So as an example would be is if I have a 2-week lead time with a customer, is that a 2-week lead time in the system? Is it effective? Now, it sounds basic, but when you get more complicated and some of the rules, the MRP settings, the planning strategies, etc., it becomes really important as to how well these rules reflect the reality. Am I make to order or make to stock, or I'm assemble to order? Because SAP actually thinks and works differently if these things aren't set up. So business rules is level 3. 4 means I'm optimal. I've literally optimized my processes, my inventory, my throughput, my customer service, everything is working as expected and is as optimal as expected, so that I can achieve level 5, which is the actual business value that was originally sold to us when everybody bought SAP. Hey, buy SAP and you're going to get increased customer retention. You're going to increase your service level. Hey, you're going to increase revenue. Very few companies actually saw that and all had a direct link back to their system because of all the challenges I mentioned. So typically, if you look at that continuum, if you're in that 4 to 5 range, you're probably at a place where you probably don't need our services. You're good enough. And frankly, that's probably the best time to move to some of the newer technologies like S4, HANA, cloud-based, etc., because you have a good solid base.
After COVID and all the issues of the last couple of years, I don't know if anyone is in optimize anymore, right? And even SAP, there's so many products, right? There's AIN, IBP you mentioned, there's a whole bunch of new industry networks they're bringing out. So the technology portfolio is also changing, right? So do you have any people who say, oh yeah, I optimized, I'm fine?
We've had 1 or 2 organizations that have been able to honestly measure themselves on the higher end and either needed just some minor adjustments, but were pretty good. But honestly, there's a statistic out there by the Standish Group that says that 90% of companies underutilize their investments. Our experience is over the last 20 plus years is that companies don't use more than 15 to 25% of this SAP asset. And so if you start pondering this notion of buying a piece of equipment or investing hundreds of millions of dollars in a plant, and then you run the plant at 10 to 20 to 30% utilization, you're probably not going to be looked at very favorably by your board of directors, right? How's that different from an SAP? We spend millions and millions of dollars on this asset, and we run it at 25% utilization. So you're right. Most companies find themselves in the 1 through 3 range. However, this is not a pandemic thing. It may have gotten a little worse because of that. But if you think of all the disruptions we've had in the past, and even independent of disruptions, companies get stuck in this notion because it's an implementation trap. We go live, We give people 2 days of training. We give them the keys to the system and say, okay, now go run your business. And we hope that they know how to do that. A year to 2 years down the road, they slowly but surely kind of fall back into 3 to 2 to 1, where they're now over customized it, or, you know, spreadsheets, etc. So you're 100% right. And the sad thing is that most people tend to look to technology to solve this problem. And it's not a technology problem. MI is not going to fix it. AI is not going to fix it. All of these are dependent on good data. If you're stuck in 2 and you can't even trust your data, how are you expecting to get any AI to get any better for you? So there's a base level of competence and skill that's required in a company to be able to use SAP effectively and to really see the benefits, which is, at the end of the day, really what we're trying to do, right, is to make the business more effective. A couple companies that we did some business with, they're all over the place, as you can see, everything from the US Navy all the way down to smaller companies. Some of the companies on the right have actually won awards for some of these initiatives that they've done. And, you know, some of these initiatives have significant benefits, you know, everything from throughput improvements to inventory savings. And I've shared some of those, but like, here's a good example with Moen. You know, Moen is a faucet organization who, you know, multinational, and they were able to resync a whole bunch of processes, build some integration back into the technology, and uplift their people's capability. To the point, actually, Vinnie, this is a good point you raised it earlier, is that it took away a lot of what people consider to be I'm overworked state. And especially with COVID, there's a lot of I'm overworked, I'm done with screen time. It's because we're working tirelessly to feed this SAP beast, as opposed to having the system do the work for us. When we get into this optimal state, the system is doing probably 70 to 80% of the work. MRP is running effectively, planning strategies are doing their job, exceptions, and you start managing by exception, it becomes a very different ball game. And so the notion is to actually take away the workload from the teams, and culturally and employee engagement, as I mentioned earlier, just goes through the roof. The additional component that these things offer for organizations is if they are specifically focused on the ESG goals, right? So if they've got environmental and social and governance goals, there are some real benefits out of this. We worked with a company out in California, and by optimizing their processes and warehousing sequence and flow using SAP standard tool sets, nothing fancy, they were able to reduce their forklift emissions by driving less, and had a pretty much a significant ESG improvement. And that was without, like I said, any additional softwares or any improvements, just using the capabilities and the smarts already built into the tool. Obviously, we work with SAP exclusively, and have had multiple customer stories and success stories. But yeah, I mean, like I said earlier, this analogy of mountain climbing is we kind of help Sherpa companies to the summit, right?
Well, pretty interesting. And I like that you focused on the product companies and the supply chains. You didn't mention much about the plant. Do you do much of the MES layer or shop floor layer?
So Vinnie, we do more of the SAP component all the way to the shop floor, right? And then we will get into the shop floor for sure, right? So if we talk about confirmations and how we schedule, absolutely. We want to try and make sure that integration is key, because at the end of the day, if we're not getting those confirmations and backflushes and all that going, the rest of the process doesn't work very effectively. There's no question about it. So yes, shop floor to top floor if you want. Everything from the strategic down to ground level, but we stay away from third-party tools though. Typically, our competence gets you to that level. If you're using MII, we're engaged, right? The SAP version, but if you're using some third-party, we typically are not.
Okay, well, Harden, thank you. This is a good overview.
Yeah, for sure. It was a pleasure meeting you and working with you.